Dogs make the best companions for humans. This podcast aims to help make humans better companions for their dogs. Welcome to the Baru Podcast, a modern lifestyle podcast for dogs and their people. I'm your host, Charlotte Bain. I've been caring for other people's dogs for more than 15 years. And while I've learned a lot in my career, I definitely don't know it all. So I've collected an ever-evolving roster of amazing dog people. And I learn new things from them all the time. Hi, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Baru Podcast. In today's episode, I chat with pet psychic Hilary Renaissance. For over 20 years, Hilary's been helping pet owners worldwide locate their lost or stolen beloved pets. She also consults on behavior issues, health and wellness concerns, and she's even helped pet parents share messages with their pets that have crossed over the Rainbow Bridge. She shares with us her journey to discovering she had this incredible ability, what you should and should not expect from a pet psychic, and why it's not a magic trick she can just pull out of a hat. She also shares some pretty phenomenal success stories. So, let's jump into the chat. All right, well, first of all, I really appreciate you popping on and chatting with me. I'm pretty excited about this conversation because you have such a wonderful gift, and one of your specialties is helping pet parents find lost dogs.
Yes.
So I would love to hear a little bit about your journey and how this came to be, how you found this gift, and how did you know that it was specific to finding lost pets?
So, amazingly, when I was growing up, I'd never heard of pet psychics or animal communicators. I lived in a small town and I didn't know what a psychic was. And so I had a lot of psychic experiences, but I just kind of processed them and didn't think much of it. But then when I was about 16 years old, I was laying in my bedroom with my cat, and all of a sudden I realized that I had picked up the message from my cat Otto that he was hungry and that he had an upset stomach. And I thought about it and I thought, how did I know that? I mean, it wasn't really feeding time or anything like that. And I just kind of accepted it as is. And I was laying there, and then all of a sudden I felt also this real sense of love from my cat Otto. And again, I didn't really think much of it or know what to think of it because it wasn't talked about then, or it wasn't a thing.
Right.
And so I kind of let it be, and I just kind of accepted that I always had that, what you might call gift, but I didn't really talk to anybody about it because there wasn't really language to talk about it back then.
Right.
And then it wasn't really until my 30s that I heard that other people were doing this weird profession like animal communication. And, when I was growing up, there was no, like, if you went to your high school guidance counselor, they didn't say, hey, do you want to be a pet psychic? I mean, I didn't even hear of that. And so when I first heard it, I heard that people were doing this animal communication gig. I thought, this is going to be like a fad, like mood rocks or something like that. I thought, oh, this is just not going to last and people aren't going to pay for this. And, I thought it was kind of laughable.
Right.
And so, but then I started thinking about it more, and you'll have to laugh, but I actually decided to go to a professional animal communicator myself, and she did a good enough job, but I thought, wow, I could do a much better job than that. And I think
that's so funny.
And I think that the difference is that this was in, about maybe 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that people were studying it, but they didn't really know how to learn it. And so a lot of people who were doing it weren't doing a very good job of it. And they were kind of fudging it, I would say, or saying, your kitty loves you so much. Well, that's kind of evident.
Yes.
So I thought, if I could get some real details and really help people, then I'd really feel good about it. But I didn't want to be one of those, psychics who, was kind of fudging and slurring along and saying things like, oh, your kitty loves you so much, or, that kind of thing. I really wanted to help people. So I actually took a few animal communication classes, and I did a really good job. And I was actually picking up on things that you couldn't know otherwise. And to me, that's the sign of a good pet psychic. You don't want to do something which, if you can really get a detail like, that cat, has a friend outside who he fights with. Like yesterday, I worked with a woman and her cat was peeing outside the litter box. Right. And she called me because she was about ready to get rid of her cat. And she didn't understand why her cat was peeing. And so I communicated with her cat, and I found out that there was a light-colored cat out there who outside their house who was coming to the window, and her cat was spraying to mark the territory and scare the cat away. Well, of course, I got what I always get from my clients. And she said, well, I didn't tell you this, because that's people always want to keep me in the dark, and they want to make sure that I'm earning my pay.
Oh, interesting.
She says, I didn't tell you this, but we have this light gray cat that's been coming to the window, and my cat and that other gray cat got in a big fight. And I heard them fighting, and, my cat scared him away. And I said, well, aha. So that was a real detail that I could get. I mean, it wasn't something I could Google or that she'd shared with anybody I knew. So it was like, that's a real thing. So to me, that is the mark of a good pet communicator or animal communicator or pet psychic or whatever you want to call it, is somebody who can get real details. So I actually did my own kind of internship for a year where I worked with people for free. And it really was a learning experience for me, because what I learned is it's actually harder to work with the people than it is with the pets. And the thing is
always the case.
I know, because people have all these expectations of me, and a lot of them are wrong. And then a lot of them also are, particularly with lost pet situations, which I'm good at, they're already in crisis. But so they don't really want to call a psychic, but they're desperate. So it's like I'm this kind of like, in between a rock and a hard place situation for them. And it's difficult. It's also really difficult to navigate with them, particularly if I have to tell them their pets have crossed over. It's like I just meet them an hour ago and I have to say, hey, I think your cat's crossed over. I could be wrong, and, but I have to gauge how is that person going to respond to this? It's almost like being a crisis counselor in a lot of cases. So anyway, I did that for a year, and then I started kind of charging for it, and I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, it absolutely answers my question. Another part of the question is, how did your people around you and people in your life react to you wanting to? I'm sure you had like a regular kind of job before doing this. How did they react to your changing and wanting to work in the psychic realm?
Actually, all my friends and family were really open to it. I kind of tend to hang out with an alternative crowd. Yeah. And so it was also kind of at the dawn of the, marketing on the internet. And I kind of got in at the right time. Because, there weren't really other people who were out there calling themselves a pet psychic. There were people out there who were calling themselves animal communicators, but I really heavily, went with the term psychic because I consider myself psychic. So I was kind of one of the only people out there, and getting in early on Google was really helpful to me. And then the other thing that really, really helped me or helped launch my career was, in about 2004, a news reporter contacted me, and he was skeptical that I could locate lost pets, and he was kind of coy about it. And I was really skeptical of him because I had a friend who's actually kind of a very popular and well-respected animal communicator who's been on quite a few TV shows. And I had heard her stories of being on both David Letterman and on being on Jay Leno's talk shows. And one of the things I learned from her is that there seems to be a formula that TV hosts do. They'll give you two things that you can get right and one thing that you can't get wrong, and it's usually a trick question. And they also don't want you to give canned answers. So they will often, like, you can negotiate with them about what you're going to do ahead of time because, it's scary to go on TV and you want to be prepared. But they don't want you to give canned answers. So they'll get you out there live on stage and ask you totally different things than you negotiated or agreed upon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They're trying to catch you. They're trying to catch you in your faults somehow,
Yeah, their job is to be entertaining. Their job is not to make you feel comfortable.
Right.
So I was very well aware of this as a possibility. And so sure enough, I tried to negotiate with the guy and said, we can talk about some of my most recent cases because I'd actually recently helped find a stolen dog in Mississippi. Mm. So I was really excited to talk about that because, that was a big deal that you could find a stolen dog in another state. Yeah. So you can actually, if you go to my website, you can watch this. So but we had negotiated beforehand that I didn't want to do a lost pet case on TV because I can't be sitting on TV and nervous and trying to be a psychic all at the same time and take in all this information. It's just not conducive to doing lost pet work. So anyway, you can see him on the interview with me. He's sitting in my living room, and about a third of the way through the conversation, he hands me a lost pet poster and says, "Can you find this cat?" Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you can see my face drop. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, I didn't say it out loud, I'm thinking to myself, we agreed not to do this.
That's not how it works. Yeah.
No. Mm-hmm. But I kind of got through it and I said, I just can't do that right now. Mm-hmm. But what was great about it was the guy was really a good news reporter and he was kind of a funny guy. And so he had actually kind of put up a scoreboard about what, score one for the pet psychic or score one for the skeptical reporter. Mm-hmm. And he followed the format. He did exactly that. I got 2 out of 3 right.
Wow.
But it was really funny the way you did it, and it was amazing because there's usually a lapse between when they do those stories and when they put them on TV, and it was like maybe a 6-month lap. Well, as soon as that happened, all of a sudden I started getting calls from people, and apparently the word had gotten out that I was out there doing this even before the show aired. And it was a really great TV clip, and it was picked up by CNN and went, on CNN. It was picked up by all these affiliate stations, and so people started calling me immediately from all over.
Oh, wow.
And I was swamped for at least 2 years. I mean, it was pretty amazing. So, of course, I put that interview up on my website, and I use it as a marketing piece because it really does show the good thing about it also in that TV show was it actually shows a clip of the TV reporter talking to a sheriff in Mississippi about how I had helped to find the dog that was stolen. And to have a TV or a sheriff who is, a law enforcement person testifying or saying that a pet psychic helped with a stolen dog, that adds a lot of credibility.
Absolutely.
So it really did help me a lot. And so, but it was also kind of funny and it's entertaining to watch. So it's probably one of the things that really launched my career.
Well, I'll for sure put the link to your website in the show notes so people can go to it and watch the clip.
Yeah.
So what does it look like when someone comes to you and they are desperate to find a lost dog? I know this is just one of the services that you offer, but they're desperate to find a lost pet. What does that look like on your end? What is the process for you? Are you allowed to share that with us? Or?
Sure. I can tell you all about it. I actually have a little spiel that I go through with all my clients and explain to them up front what I can and can't do, because in talking to people over the last 20 years, I've learned people have just a really wide variety of expectations of psychics. Yeah. And it's because I think people don't know, or maybe it's their first time talking to a psychic or whatever. But this is what I tell people. When I work with pets, I work differently than most animal communicators or other psychics. Most other psychics will stay with you on the phone while they're communicating with the pet. But I find I get better information by getting a little bit of information from the person about the pet and how the pet went lost, and then doing a meditation that's off the phone, and it takes me about an hour. I get really relaxed, and then I try to communicate with pets. And as you can imagine, lost pets are difficult to communicate with because they're often scared or upset, or they don't understand what's going on from them from a human's perspective.
Right.
So what I do basically is I interview the person. I say, what happened to how did your pet go missing? I get the name of the pet, a picture of the pet. I get the street address of where the pet went missing, which gives me a kind of a context to what to look for in the area. And then I get off the phone and I communicate with the pet, and the kind of information I receive from animals is more like an impression. So it's not picture perfect like you would see on a TV screen. So for example, with a lost dog, I may see a lost dog hiding underneath the deck of a red tall house with a white SUV type vehicle or parked in the driveway, and there's a big green hedge in the yard, and in this case, the dog thinks he's about 5 to 8 houses away and around a corner from where he took off, but unfortunately he's heard fireworks, and even though he's heard his people calling for him, he's afraid to come out. Now it can really vary, and one of the things that people always want me to do is give them a street address, but I can't do that because I bet you know why. Dogs can't read.
Right. And they can't be like, hey, I'm over here at Barbara's house. Yeah.
Right. And so there are some people out there offering map dowsing services, which I don't do. And I don't, for legal reasons, I'm not going to tell you why I don't believe it works, but I personally don't think you can do it.
What is that? It's a, what did
map
you say?
Dowsing is basically, it's a technique that was originally started to help people find oil and water and things that are constant underground. So it was used by, you'd see an old geezer with a stick, and he'd take the stick and he'd look for water in certain places. And it was used by oil companies. It still is. I mean, it does work for those things, but I personally don't believe it works for animals because, first of all, animals are sentient beings and they're moving around, and their heads, their spiritual sense, particularly when they're lost, can give you lost. Basically, they're lost. And so how could you use a map dowsing for that? Now, that doesn't just say that, you shouldn't, I'm not saying, don't use map dowsers. I'm just saying I don't personally use that service.
Got it.
But anyway, so that's the kind of information I get from dogs and cats. One thing that I can't get, as I said, is, a street address. And that's hard because a lot of times people will call me with will call me and I'll get, your dog was picked up by somebody and, they drove in a car. And of course, when a dog gets in a car, they're not driving themselves, and they can't say, oh, we got on the freeway and then we turned off at the McDonald's and then we went right at the Capitol building. And so if I'm getting something like, the dog is possibly about an hour's drive away in a beige house in a big neighborhood, that can be a real problem for people. So because there's lots of, beige houses in neighborhoods, about 2 miles away or about hour's drive away. So I kind of can give people a starting point. I always say I'm best at finding animals that are close by, because then, we have landmarks and, we can go for things like yesterday I worked with a woman and hooray, she contacted me and said she got her cat back. I know. And I said that the cat had been scared away by a raccoon and was actually hiding in the gray house next door underneath a porch or a deck. And there were these big trees that were kind of overshadowing the trees or deck. And so I got an email back from her today that she got her cat back. So I love those kind of cases. I'm a little bit more upset when somebody calls me and says, my cat's been missing for 15 months and I suspect it was stolen. So
you're like,
I'm like, oh dear, but I have found stolen pets, many of them, and I found pets, all over the world, amazingly. So
oh my gosh.
I know. I mean, last year I found this is a really strange story. A woman contacted me, and she was in Iraq. And I was like, you're in Iraq? And she was missing 2 husky dogs. And I was like, husky dogs in Iraq? How does that happen? And I won't go into it, but she got her dogs back. And I was right about where they were. It was kind of amazing.
Have they taken off running? Because those huskies, they can run for hundreds of miles once they get scared enough. Yeah.
They had, and they'd gone into another compound, and I don't quite remember all the details because it was about a year ago, but I put it up on my website. They'd gone into some compound and were being taken care of by these two guys. And so she was able to, through her own contacts, to figure out who those people were and somehow negotiated to get the dogs back. So that was really cool.
Amazing.
Anyway,
so essentially you have like it's almost like you have a TV screen shot of where they are, what's happening. So you it's visual for you, right? So you get to see pictures essentially.
Well, I'll tell you what I am. Actually, there's actually a Latin word for it. I have three things. I'm clairvoyant, which means clear seeing in Latin. I'm clairaudient, which means clear hearing in Latin. And then I'm clairsentient, which means clear knowing in Latin. And I put all those things together because I do hear sounds, and I do all of a sudden just know something from an animal's perspective. It's like all of a sudden I know, like, for example, when I was working with that woman with the cat yesterday, I didn't see an image of the raccoon. I just knew all of a sudden that there was a raccoon out there, and it was that the cat felt that there was some kind of predator who had hissed, and I know enough about raccoons and how they behave that I was able to pretty quickly put that together. So it's like that. But the kind of information I get is more like an impression. So it's not picture perfect like you would see on a TV screen. And I'll tell you why. Cats and dogs don't go to school like you and I do. And, remember when you were in grade school and they'd like show you a picture and they'd say, that's a truck or that's a house or whatever. Well, dogs, we forget that we had years of learning this and going to grade school to figure out immediately what those things are. Whereas dogs and cats don't. And when they're scared, they're also a lot of times not looking at things real clearly, or they're peeking at things, or they're upset. So it's more like I get a picture and I have to figure out what it is. And I always say to myself, the more that I don't know what I'm looking at, usually the more right I am or more correct I am, because it means that I'm seeing things from an animal's perspective. And when I have taught animal communication classes in the past, and one of the funnest things I do in the class is I put up on a big picture board pictures. I draw what I saw, and then I ask, from a lost pet, and I ask my students to interpret what that was. And nobody can ever guess. So one of the things I draw is a big square and a hole, and then a headless person, and I do it in a stick thing. So what is that? Well, it turned out that case was a cat had gone into an RV lot, and that hence the big box things. And that there was a hole there was a whole lot of RVs at a car dealership, in like the back of the car dealership. You know how they sometimes will keep a whole inventory back there? Well, this was a big lot with a lot of RVs, and it was kind of like torn up grass and those kind of things. And then what the whole thing with a person without a head that the cat was showing me is that there was nobody in the car.
Oh my God. So you had to piece all of those things together.
I did, but I got it right. And so I had already seen that there was I Googled the area, and I'd already seen that there was a car lot there, but it was an old picture. And so I didn't know that there were RVs there, but I said I could finally then figure out by like working with the cat, figure out that the RV was beige, and that there was a long tunnel near it, and that there was some bumpy grass. And so my client was able to find the cat there in the RV, in a hole underneath an RV, basically. That's where the cat was. So
that is incredible.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing to do. But I think that one of my most successful things that I do that other animal communicators don't do is you have to realize that animals aren't going to see things on your perspective. And I think that a lot of animal communicators don't take that time. And that's why I take an hour to do that off the phone, because going back and forth with an animal is really hard. And I actually am very proud that this last year I actually helped find 2 snakes.
Oh my gosh. Don't tell my sister. She's terrified of snakes.
Well, I laughingly say I'm now a member of Slytherin in the Harry Potter series.
Yep.
But the reason I'm really proud to communicate have found snakes or get information about them is because snakes don't rely on visual clues. And you have to, if you're going to communicate with a snake, you're going to have to go with them and take the journey of these things. What was the surface that I was on like? Was it slippery? Was it bumpy? Was it cold? What did the air feel like? Did you go up or down? What is the temperature like now? Are you dormant for a while? Because snakes do go dormant for a while, oftentimes in a new situation. Is the ground vibrating? Those kind of things. So, like just recently, last year, I worked with a woman, and it was actually her mother had contacted me, and she had the daughter kept, and I don't know why, but she did. She's in Utah, and she kept a big rack, like shelves racks with like snakes in it, and each snake had his own plastic tub with that kind of hamster-like chips or whatever it is, and she had left one of the lids open to the thing, or to the tub, and the snake had gotten out, and the snake had been missing for 2 days, and they had looked high and low all through their house. And so she asked me to communicate with the snake, and I was like, oh dear, here we go. This is going to be hard because, but I did know, and I couldn't obviously see inside her house through Google, and I kind of wanted to go in blind because I wanted to figure out what were the surfaces the snake had gone on. So I got that the snake had gone down the tub, gone down onto the ground, and then gone into this kind of like what felt like bumpy vinyl floor, and then had gone into kind of a dark, cool room, and had stayed there for a while. But then the snake had decided that he was hungry, and he had actually he knew how to get back, and he had actually climbed back up to the tub and was on the bottom of it. And I told this to the woman, and I said, she says, no, I've looked there 100 times. I said, well, go look again. And guess where the snake was? I don't know how the snake was sticking to the bottom of the tub.
Unbelievable.
I know, but that's where the snake was. So, I mean, but it was me, I wasn't seeing visual things, and I think that you have to realize if you're going to communicate with animals, you have to take them from what's their perspective and how they see the world. Right. And it's only taken me a long time to really get the confidence in that, and also not feel the pressure from people, because, people call me and they want their pets back now, and they're skeptical. And so I always want to do the best, but it puts a lot of pressure on me. And so I have to say, just center myself and say, do the best you can. And, you're going to get it wrong sometimes, because not all animals know where they are, or sometimes you're just sometimes getting, random thoughts and from the animal. And I always say, if you're going to work with a psychic, be prepared for some things to be wrong. It's just like, if you're going to, what they say in if you talk to a policeman and you say, if a policeman interviews a bunch of people about what happened at a crime scene, they're all going to give you a different perspective. And that's true with animals. And the best way to explain that is, or I heard it explained by a woman named Carol Gurney, who's an animal communication teacher, was she said, imagine that you're in this boring office cubicle, and you're daydreaming that you're in Hawaii and you're drinking a margarita or Mai Tai or whatever it is you're drinking there, and you're on the beach and there's palm trees. Well, if the psychic turns into you at that time, you're going to get the pine trees and the margarita and the beach. Now, of course, it's hard to sort that out, and it's hard to say in psychic terms, are you dreaming this, or is this some kind of random thought you're having? It's hard to focus on that. So, I'm proud to say a lot of times I get it right, but I'm also unproud to say, or just to say, I don't always get it correct. And that's not because I don't try, it's because that's the nature of psychic information.
Well, that's amazing. What are some of you mentioned that people have unrealistic expectations of what you can and can't do, and they kind of bring all of that to the table. What are some of the things that people tend to expect from you?
Well, the one I can tell you what it is right now at this time of year because there's cycles of it. The
Oh,
funniest,
interesting.
yes, and it has to do with right now with economics. Everybody got their Christmas bills on their credit cards, and they're all poor, or
Yeah.
a lot of them are. And so
Yeah.
I tell people, I have to do, it takes me an hour and I can't deviate from that. Well, I get a lot of people saying things like, can't you do a 10-minute reading? And people don't understand that this is not something I can just pull out of a hat. It's not a magic trick. And so you can't divide it like that. And it's hard for me to deal with that because it comes in cycles, and I've gotten already a few this year. And so there's that expectation of it.
Yeah.
The other expectation is that I'm seeing things from God's perspective or an aerial view, and that I'm all knowing. And so this is one of the funny things that I get. I'll talk to people, and I have a scheduled amount of time, and I take the time to, figure out what their questions are beforehand. Like, why is my cat peeing? Or, what does my cat think of my husband? Or those kind of things. So I'll really carefully go through those questions in the allotted amount of time. And then people get all caught up in it. And then at the end of the session, they'll say it's always some sheepish question they have. They didn't want it to ask, but they only had a certain amount of money, or a certain amount of time, but the question comes out. And it can be everything from, something benign to well, what does my cat think of my other dog to, well, I didn't tell you, but I'm thinking of putting my dog down for euthanasia.
Right.
And they want to tack that down at the end of the session, and they'll say, can you just pull that out of your hat? And I always say, it's kind of like this. You and I could be having a conversation, a really deep conversation about, for example, what do you think of Donald Trump? And we could talk about that for an hour. And then at the end of the conversation, I go and I talk to my friend Rita, and I can tell her, everything that you or think about Donald Trump. But if she were to say, hey, what do you think about world peace? Or what does Rita, what do you think about world peace? Or, what's your favorite car? I won't know that, because I'm not all knowing. And so people seem to think that I'm going to be all knowing like God.
Right.
And that's not true. It's like having a conversation back and forth, and I only know what people tell me or what they don't. And I don't know what they don't tell me. I mean, I don't know what animals don't tell me too. So that's the point of that. So I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. How can your work with animals help us be kind of better companions to our dogs and our cats?
Well,
improve our relationship. Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of a problem solver. So I'm a Capricorn and with a a moon in Virgo. So I like problems. I'm not kind of one of these people who wants to chat with your pet and say, "Oh, she loves you so much." I find that very boring. And it doesn't hold my attention. And to tell you the truth, it doesn't really hold animals' attention either.
Right.
So
Sorry, guys.
I know. So
Sorry, everybody.
I know. So I like to solve problems. And one of the things I think I mentioned this, I had a client yesterday, and she contacted me because her cat was peeing outside the litter box and had been spraying on her, spraying on the windows and doors and all over the house. And she had come home from a vacation, and there was pee everywhere, and she was thinking about giving up the cat. And unfortunately, a lot of cats get surrendered for that. I mean, they get taken to the shelter, and I hear this all the time. I hear, my husband won't put up with this anymore, or, I can't live with this anymore. It's too upsetting to me. And so, and I understand that. So what I do is I try to get the cat's perspective on why it is that the cat is peeing outside the litter box. And I've kind of like broken it down in my own mind, because I know cats so well, as to what their behavior is. And most cats who are peeing outside the litter box are doing it for a reason. They're solving a problem in a way that they know how to. And so, as I said, with the woman with the cat who was spraying outside the litter box, it turned out that the cat was seeing this light gray cat outside the house and was out there. And so the cat was peeing to make sure that the other cat couldn't get in.
Right.
And so I got validation from the woman. Yeah, she knew that great cat, so that was good for her. So she was really interested to hear what I had to say. And so I gave her some things that she could do, tailored to her specific situation, so that you could
Right.
get rid of the problem. Because cats are not, most cats don't want to pee outside the litter box. They're only doing it
Right.
because they're defending themselves, or sometimes they'll do it because they're upset about something, or they have a bladder infection, or they're trying to
Right.
tell their owner something and they feel like the owner isn't listening. And they know that
Interesting.
the animal, they know that the person isn't listening. And so I try to figure out what we can do. So I believe if you take away the root cause of the problem, hopefully the symptom will go away. So in this case, the root
Right.
cause of the problem was that the cat needed a way to defend the house. And so he was doing the
Mm-hmm.
best thing he could, which was pee all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And so the symptom, so that was a
Hmm.
symptom, was the pee. And so I worked with the woman
Yeah.
on what are the things that we can do to take away some of the problem. Obviously, you can't get rid of that cat outside. So what can we do? And so I worked with her on that. And, I gave her some suggestions, and I'm pretty sure it's going to work. I can't make it work in
That's
all,
great.
all cases. Um,
Right.
like I have a long-term client, and she takes in, for example, rescue cats who'd been outside,
Mm-hmm.
and she doesn't let them go outside because she's really adamant that there are dangers out there. And I
Yeah.
understand her perspective, but for example, her cat has been peeing on her bed chronically for the
Mm.
last 6 months or so, and it's gotten so bad that she's like putting like tarps over her bed, because she doesn't want it to be peed
Mm-hmm.
on. And her cat who's peeing on the bed really is trying to say, "I want out." And my client is
Yeah. And
adamant that that's not going to happen, and they live in a pretty small apartment, and on top of
mm-hmm.
that the cat can see all these birds out the window, and so the cat
Mm-hmm.
is like, I see the grand birds out there, and I remember how great that is, and I don't understand why you don't want me to go out. um,
Right.
so we've had to really work with that, and finally I've said to her, you can't take the cat out of the cat in this case, particularly a cat that's been living outdoors for so long. And so, you're either going to have to get used to it, or you're going to have to rehome the cat to where the cat can go outside. So I
Right.
gave her that perspective. I mean, I'm not Harry Potter with a magic wand,
Right.
and I can't force a
Right.
cat to do something, but at least I'm able to give my clients some perspective on it in that case. Let's see, other things that I help animals with. I also do like to do, I do actually do readings where people ask me for things that are not problem solving things. I don't, you
That
know,
was going to be my next question. What are some of, I know you do readings where you can just communicate with your dog. And you also communicate with pets that have passed on. Is that correct?
I do. Communicating with the spirit world is kind of light and delicate. I always say
Yeah.
you have to go in like you're an angel. And
Mm-hmm.
and people are skeptical on top of that. They don't believe you're going to
Right.
be able to do it. So one of the things I've learned is I have to give them that aha moment immediately during the session, or they're just going to be sitting there listening for me
You're going to lose them.
I'm going to lose them because they're not hearing anything that they can't think is, that is not true, or they're waiting for that aha moment. So I have to give them
Right.
that immediately, or I've lost them. And so that's one of the reasons I don't like doing them, particularly with people who come
Mm.
to me and say really negative things up front, like "I don't believe you," or
Right.
people, and I get a lot of that. I mean, I get a lot of people.
Why are you here then? Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
why
like,
are you here then? It's like, okay, if you're going to tear this
yeah.
apart, I always say,
Right.
get what you can out of it. And it is true, there are
Mm-hmm.
some animal communicators out there who really are not communicating with pets, so I get it.
Right.
But then if
Right.
you really are going to somebody who you think is a real psychic and you trust them enough for that and you paid them for that, then, be open to it. But I'll never
Right.
forget the first one I did was for a young lady in New York, and she had lost her, and I'm using euphemism name. This is not the dog's real name. I'm
Right.
calling the dog Tinker for privacy's sake. And she had sent me a picture of Tinker, and unfortunately Tinker had died, and she wanted to know, she felt really unfortunately guilty about that she maybe had not taken good enough care of the dog, and it had been really hard for her at the last minute to make that decision about euthanasia, and she wanted to know if the dog was angry with her or not. I get that a lot from people, did I do the right thing? Should I have waited? Right. It's really hard because, you're getting information from your vet, but you don't really, it's like you're having to put that all together. So anyway, my client asked me about Tinker, and I got that aha moment right away. It was great because I got that the woman had actually bought herself, and this is kind of iconic, she'd bought herself a dog stuffed toy that looked like her dog and was sleeping with it in bed with herself. Now, you can't Google that. You can. Nope, that's not something you can Google. So I said, hey, I got that you got this really wonderful stuffed toy, and that you've been sleeping with this. And she was like, really? You got that? And it turned out I was totally right. And so I had a client for life. And she still calls me, 20 years later, just off of that one aha moment. So I always try to get one of those, but sometimes I can't. Sometimes it's real vague, but I always do my best in that case. And I think that it's, I think it's really healing for a lot of people because, it's trauma. It's traumatic to have to make those decisions about, whether to have your dog or cat euthanized. And a lot of people feel guilt afterwards. Obviously one of the stages of grieving is guilt. And that really hits pet owners bad because they made that decision to have, their pet euthanized. So I do those kind of readings. I like them, but they're also, I always feel like I'm walking on, again, I feel like I'm kind of like walking on eggshells until I get people to trust me. And that's one of the things I've had to learn to live with in this is that I can only do my best. I'll say that 1,000,000 times.
Yeah, we can all only do our best in everything we do. So why should you be any different, right?
Yes.
Why should the expectation be any different from a psychic, right?
Well, but then people can come back at me. Well, you're advertising this, and this is what you signed up to do.
Right.
And I have a personal sense of pride and responsibility to give them what they want. I want people to be happy, and so I feel like I don't want to let people down, and I don't want to let myself down either. So it's a hard thing, but I do my best. So
yeah. Well, you do a fantastic job. We were talking. We mentioned that you also people also turn to you just to have conversations, right, with their pets. So what are some of the things that people can look for when they just want you to tune into their pet, just to kind of, is it medical or is it just
Yes, people have asked me for. All right, so if you go to any animal communicator or pet psychic's website, there's going to be a disclaimer there that says I'm not a veterinarian, I can't solve medical problems. You're going to find that on anybody's, and I have that same disclaimer up there for a reason. First of all, to protect myself legally, but also because I can ask an animal, where does your body hurt, and what does this feel like, and I have actually accurately diagnosed cancer. I'll never forget the first one I did where I was working with this lady and her rabbit was peeing on her bed and she didn't know why. And so I got that the rabbit was peeing on the bed because the bed smelled like the woman, and that the rabbit was in a lot of pain. And rabbits can be pretty stoic about that kind of thing. But I got that the rabbit was in a lot of pain, and it felt to me like the rabbit's bones were deteriorating. And I use that, I guess the big C word came up to me right away. Yeah. I just empathetically got it. This rabbit had cancer. And so, I said, well, you need to take your rabbit to the vet, and she did. And unfortunately, the rabbit did have cancer that had spread through his body. So, I can ask an animal, where does it hurt? I can also ask an animal, would you want this kind of treatment? Because, that's a hard decision or executive decision that the person is going to have to make, and it's expensive and it's time consuming. So I think it's really good to get the input of the animal. You'll have to laugh, but I get a lot of people whose cats' emotions and cats and dogs' emotions mimic some of the owner's emotions. So I get a lot of people who they call me and they say, my dog has separation anxiety. And it turns out that the person is very anxious themselves. And I believe that the cat or dog came into their life because a lot of people aren't really willing to take care of themselves, but they'll take care of their pets in a way that they won't take care of themselves. And so I believe that the journey of having this pet and learning to take care of the pet and have empathy for the pet's situation is a way to learn to help themselves. And so I often have that conversation with people. It's like, this is really an opportunity for you because, here you're having all this empathy for your pet and, really wanting to see, or you're really seeing how this is like messing up the pet's life and they could be doing better. And how is that for you? I mean, I'm sure your friends and family are seeing you the same way. And could you give yourself some of that compassion, and what can you learn from that? So that's something that comes up quite a bit. I'd have to think about it more. I mean, I've answered, I get so many different calls.
Yeah,
from
I'm
so
sure.
many
How many
people.
and
they're all different
readings do you do a day? Do you get?
Well, it really
is there a point where you're just like, I can't? Does it take a toll on your system? Like in any other job, is there a point where like I can't take any more on?
The most you'll have to laugh, but the most pets I've ever done in one day is 12.
That's a lot.
I know. It's 12-hour days plus all the time to talk to people. So
sure.
That was I was regularly doing like 12-hour days sometimes after I'd been on TV in 2004.
Yeah.
I don't like to do that. I personally like to do about maybe 4 a day.
Yeah.
Because that's about all I like. But I find myself starting to get pretty cranky at about the eighth pet. But I will do it. I will do it. So, if
well, that's like an 8-hour day. If you put put the actual like tuning in part with the conversations and all the other stuff, that's a good solid 8-hour day.
Yeah,
at least,
it is.
Right?
It's definitely an 8-hour day. So yeah, that I guess that kind of sums up the kind of questions I can ask animals. One of my most recent success stories was last summer, and it was a big, not that I don't have other success stories, but it was a kind of a really dramatic story.
We love dramatic
because it was, once again, people love the stories where there's no way that she could have known that. And this is that story in a nutshell. The lady called me up. Her name is Kathleen, and you can see it on my website. This is not a euphemism. That's her real name. And her dog Cash had gone missing, and they had been staying in a hotel in Temecula, California. And the dog had run off, and she'd been looking for the dog for several days, and there had been no sightings whatsoever. And around Temecula, California, there's a lot of desert land, and then there's a whole bunch of different things there, but it's kind of sparse. And she really didn't know what to do, and she put up all kinds of posters, and she contacted me and she's like, I know you can do this. And I was like, well, this is going to, this breed of dog is the kind that will run. And they often hide. And I knew
what
that.
Kind of dog
and
was
I knew
it?
that this was,
remember?
It's kind of a cattle breed dog. And if they get spooked by something, they may go out and like sniff on stuff, but if they get spooked by something, they're often going to take off and go hide. And so I was like, this is going to be difficult because there's a lot of open space here and there's lots of places for dogs to hide. So anyway, I communicated with her dog, Cash, and Cash told me he was about 2 miles away and he'd seen this beige building, and it looked like kind of like a cargo building or like one of those cargo containers. And there was a big tarp around there. And then there was, I forget there was a couple other details that I mentioned, but it turned out they were there. And then I said that there was this hole and that the dog had gone into a hole and couldn't get out. Well, I didn't hear from the woman for several days, but then I got a call from her, and she said, Hilary says, I was determined. She says, I knew you were right. And so it turned out, long story short, that she had found the cargo building and the tarp and the other things and the hole. And what the hole turned out to be was a drilling pipe for, I don't know, sewers or something like that, but it went down 200 feet. And her dog was at the bottom of that 200-foot pipe. And that's, I don't even know that you could have that there. But she'd had to hire somebody who does like plumbing snaking or something with one of those cameras to get down there to the bottom of the hole. They found the dog down there and had to pull the dog out. And there's video on my website, in my Found Pet blog thing, of her getting the dog back and her screaming, Cash, Cash. And I'm going to give you a steak because the dog had been down there in that hole, probably going to die. There was no way the dog could get out of that hole. It was a slippery pipe inner thing, you know. So I think it's like some kind of PVC pipe or something. You can't climb out of that. There's no trick, you know, there's no friction. And plus it must have been really sweaty or cold down there at times and really hot down there at times. So it was like literally her efforts and my efforts together helped find that dog. And I'm sure that dog would have died otherwise.
That story gave me chills, and poor puppy. I'm so glad he was reunited with his parents. That's so scary, but also amazing that you did that.
I know. And then let's see, another one. This one's on my website. It's actually the one that the TV reporter reported on. Was the guy who where the police chief was involved. So this was back in 2004, but I tell this story quite often because a woman called me up from Mississippi, and at that time I wasn't really Googling stuff, and I didn't really know she was in Mississippi, but it turned out I thought she was in Tennessee, but who knows? It didn't matter to me. Dogs don't know if they're in Tennessee or Mississippi either. But she told me that her dog had gone missing, and she thought the dog was just kind of gone out on a grand runaround or safari or something like that. Yeah. Well, I got that a man had picked up the dog and was keeping the dog, and the details of it were that the man had he was keeping the dog in the shed with a red motorcycle. And it turned out that there was only one red motorcycle registered in her town. And she's kind of a woman with clout, and I won't say why she's with clout, but she has a lot of clout. And so she got the sheriff to kind of go out there. Well, these people were kind of sketchy about the whole thing. And people were saying, yeah, that guy has your dog, and she was able to get that information. The sheriff was too, but nobody was able to go on the property because there wasn't probable cause. So long story short, though, she got her dog back. She and the sheriff put so much pressure on the guy that he finally, he was seen dumping the dog onto her lawn in the middle of the night. So let's put it that way.
What a dick. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's an interesting story. There's a lot of nuances to it. But anyway, so that... Okay. But the good news about that was that the sheriff was like in on the process and knew about it, and so he was able to talk to the TV reporter and share that. And so that was a really great story where, again, I think that the guy unfortunately might have been doing it out of vindictiveness to my client, and I don't know what if it would eventually have happened to the dog. Got it. But the dog had come back with all kinds of parasites, and unfortunately, we were able to work through that, and the dog didn't lose his leg because the dog had been kept in standing water in the shed, and so the dog had it was just a sad story. Anyway,
but she was able to get the dog back to health. For the most part?
Yes, she was able to get the dog back to help, and actually I helped her with that because there was questions about whether the dog wanted his leg amputated or not. And I said, I know this is going to sound weird, but I said that the dog felt like what was really going on was only in the dog's feet, and that if they were to just treat the dog's feet and not the whole leg, that the problem would go away. And it turned out I was right about that.
Wow.
They did trade the dog's feet, and the dog didn't have to lose his leg, which was great.
Wow.
And it was a great experience because it did get a lot of notoriety, and the woman does have a lot of clout, and so she had me come to her area and teach a workshop in her area, and so I got to teach a workshop there with her and her family and all the people with these wonderful Southern accents.
That's so cute. So when you're teaching a workshop, this is my last question. I don't want to keep you too long, but when you're teaching a workshop, what does that entail? So if someone comes to you and they're like, I want to learn how to be an animal communicator, or an animal psychic, how is that? How do you learn to do that? This might be for a whole nother podcast episode, so forgive me if it's too like labor intensive. But I would love to know, because I would love to know how I could do that, because I think I have a little bit of that in me. So,
well, everybody does.
Yeah.
I mean, I believe this is what I believe. I believe that it's like some people have more aptitude than others. That's the fact. Like I have aptitude, but you might have some, but this is the way I tell it to people. You know, if you were a child and you were told, first of all, like I was, that psychics were unreal or they were frauds, you'd never try to learn. And so when you are learning, probably 99% of the problem is getting past your own barriers that you can do it. And one of the things that I see time and time again is that in a group situation where you have a whole bunch of people doing exercises together and you're getting all this support, people can do a pretty good job their first time. Everybody can. Right. But then they get out of the class and they're not with the people and they go back to their own biases and they can't. Plus, it's stressful for them to even try. So I personally, one of the reasons I'm not teaching classes right now is that so many other people are. But the real reason is because, people want to do those classes over the internet because they're cheaper that way and teachers make more money that way. But I personally think you have to do it in a group and you have to have that group support. Whereas if you're all on a Zoom call or something like that, people are distracted. It adds an added layer, and people, you don't get that success, and then they walk out of the class thinking, well, maybe everybody else can do this, but I can't. Right. So the number one criteria for me in teaching a class is getting everybody together in a group, which is hard, and I personally don't have a lot of time to organize that stuff. So, I mean, I have taught classes, but I'm pretty much probably not going to do it again. Okay. Just because it is time consuming and a lot of people will back out at the last minute or whatever. And it's just like, I don't have time for that. But to tell the truth, you can teach people skills about, how to give and send and receive information. And the most important thing to know is that, you have to take that time to get relaxed. And so it's good if I can lead people through a relaxation exercise. And then I really do just try to get them to either send or receive, because a lot of times people get in their heads and they think, I've got to get it all right away. And then that's when they start getting back into their, rational mind, and then they can't get anything. So it's really breaking down for people how to do this process, and either you've got to be sending or receiving, but you can't be doing both at once. Multitasking just doesn't work in this case. So
you have to just kind of set the intention that you're gonna, in this hour you're gonna send information, or set the intention
or receive
the information.
Yeah, you have to send and receive, and breaking that down for people, and then giving them questions to ask and having them write it down. And one of the funniest things that I see, and this is probably the end of this conversation, but one of the funniest things I see is that people will actually, I'll have people ask a question like, what's the most important thing to you, dog? You're this dog that you're communicating with. And people will actually get stuff that's really correct. It might not be real detail, but they get stuff that they couldn't have known otherwise. But they almost everybody says, but I probably could have known that anyway. Yeah, and so they discount themselves.
Yeah.
And they do it again and again. So I actually had after my second class, I actually had gold stars that I could have people for, like, you got this, that, the other thing. But still people cycled back to, no, I probably should have known that, And so they're getting into their own biases about psychic. So you have to have a lot of practice doing animal communication until you all of a sudden start trusting yourself.
Right.
And that's just a process that everybody has to go through. Right. Not just me and not just you, but I would say everybody. I've seen that many times.
Right. Okay, I have one more quick question.
Okay.
Like a zillion more, but the one more quick question. So what could you know when you just said what is the most important to this particular dog? Have you found that there's something like across the board that's of high importance to dogs in your work? Or is it just vary to dog? Like some dogs would be like a ball, some dogs would be food, or some dogs would be something completely different? Or
I would say
emotional support.
I would say most dogs, the most important thing is their people when they're communicating with me. I mean, I would say that's universal. And then I would say it's different per dog and per breed. I mean, it's funny. I was talking to a guy the other day, and he has a Pomeranian, and we were laughing because I always say the breed has maybe about one brain cell amongst the whole breed.
I love a Pomeranian.
They're not the smartest dogs, and so if you ask them to think like another dog or to think outside the box, it's just not possible for them. They don't. They want to be. I would say the breed mostly wants to be the little prince or little princess, and that's the most important thing to them. So you could say and if they're not getting to be the little prince or the little princess, then that's where you start having problems like them peeing or fighting with other dogs. But for the whole breed, I would say it all boils down to, am I the princess or am I not the princess? That's it. And we were laughing about that because the guy rescues not only Pomeranians, but he rescues pit bulls, which also have a different set of kind of, breed specific wantings. They're very in the moment, and they love smells and they love people and they love the pack. They want everybody to be together, and they feel like it's their job to make sure that the pack is together and that they're there with their humans. I mean, they're very family-oriented dogs. So to them, if you're communicating with them, it's going to boil down to issues of how can we all be together and how can I get as many smells as possible?
Interesting. Okay.
That's what it would all kind of boil down to. But there can be all kinds of other issues.
That is so fascinating. God, Hilary, you're amazing. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to add? I'm definitely going to, after this conversation, hit you up for a session. So with my dog.
Okay.
I'm all in. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's great.
We'll talk afterwards. But
all right.
Is there anything else that you want to add? I really
no,
appreciate
just
you
thanks for having me. This has been great. You've been a great moderator. So pat yourself on the back.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Baru Podcast. If you're interested in a session with Hilary Renaissance, you can check out her website, calmpet.com. And not to worry, I will put a link in the show notes. And as always, if you enjoyed the episode, please don't forget to rate and follow the Baru Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at Baru Podcast. If you have a story of canine companionship that you want to share with me, or a question, or even a comment, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me, charlotte@thebaru.com. All right, you guys. Thanks so much. Let's chat next week.